talk about solving more trig equations. And so if you notice, I put some tips together. And so the first tip for solving a trig equation, if the equation only has one trig function, then you isolate it. And so we looked at that yesterday. So if it had like the function was all in terms of sine, you got the sines together, you got the sine all by itself. The second tip is to try and factor. So if you have two functions that have this, they have the same term in common, you can factor those out. The third tip is to try and substitute an identity. So let's review, in fact, what those identities are. And so the first identity, if you remember, was sine squared plus cosine squared equals what? 1. So that's the first identity. The next one is going to be 1 plus cotangent squared x equals cosecant squared x. And then the next one is tangent squared x plus 1 equals secant squared x. And so when you're looking to substitute an identity, you're looking for two trig functions squared, or you're looking for the number 1 and a trig function squared, or you could just have a trig function squared. Okay? This fourth tip is to square each side. The problem with this is that whenever you square, what you need to do is you need to check your solutions, because sometimes you will get what's known as an extraneous solution. So if you ever do this fourth step, square each side, you're going to have to check your answers. Now checking your answers isn't hard, it's just an added step. So the first two we looked at yesterday. We're going to look at the bottom two today. So let's go ahead and jump right in with an example. So if you look at this example, it says find all solutions of each equation on the interval 0 to 2 pi. Now we, yesterday, looked at finding all solutions. So if you remember yesterday, every answer we had what attached to it?
Yes.
Yep, plus or minus 2 pi n. Okay, so that was every solution. Now this solution is specifically looking for answers within the 0 to 2 pi range. So all we're going to be doing here is we don't have to do the plus or minus 2 pi n. All we have to do is use the values that are on our pink sheet. So let's go ahead and look at this. It says sine squared minus sine plus 1 equals cosine squared. All right, so yeah. We've got sine, we've got cosine, we've got a sine squared. So this is an option. Okay, notice I've got a sine squared and a sine. Okay, this cosine squared is kind of like the odd person out. So let's get rid of the cosine squared. What do I know cosine squared is equivalent to? 1 minus sine squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace cosine squared. I'm going to replace cosine squared with 1 minus sine squared. Now remember, that's one of those identities. And so now, what happens to your ones? They're gone. Okay, and so I've got a sine squared minus sine equals negative sine squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the sine squared over here to the left. Now remember, we can't divide if, when we divide, we eliminate a trig function. And so in this case, if I look at this, I end up getting 2 sine squared x minus sine x equals what? 0. So then now, each of those has a trig function. So what do? Factor them out. So I'm going to take out a sine. So when I take that sine out, I am left with 2 sine x minus 1 equals 0. Now what is my next step? Those of you that were here yesterday?
Sine equals 0.
Yep, sine x equals 0. Or
2 sine x minus 1.
2 sine x minus 1 equals 0. So basically what we've done is we've applied the zero product property. Okay, zero product property states that either that equals 0 or this equals 0. Final step, you've got your pink chart. Go ahead and look at your pink chart. Where does sine equal 0?
0.
0, pi, 2 pi.
0 and pi. Now, this is the thing. Why don't I use 2 pi? The reason why I don't use 2 pi is this parenthesis right here. What that parenthesis tells us is you don't include 2 pi.
Yeah, so how do you take this information and then
Yeah,
make?
if it would have been a bracket, you would have used it, but since it's a parenthesis, remember, we go all the way up until 2 pi, but we don't include it. So we've got 0 and pi. Now what we need to do is solve this other one. So to solve this other one, I get 2 sine x to equal 1. And so now I end up getting sine x to equal 1/2. So on your pink chart, where does sine equal 1/2? And there should be 2 values. Pi over 6 and what else? 5 pi over 6. So we have a total of 4 different solutions on this problem.
Beautiful.
Alrighty.
If you watch
Oh, you don't have to write it out then, though?
that's your answer?
That's your answer.
You don't do the plus or minus.
Nope. Okay, so now, if you look at this, I've got sine x minus cosine x equals 1. So now we're going to go through the checklist, or the 4 steps we have to start with. Our first step is if it's written all in terms of one trig function, is that all one trig function? No, so we can't just isolate one. Second step was to factor. Can I factor anything out here? No. Third step is to substitute for a trig identity. Can you substitute? No, because they're not squared. So the last step, and this is the last resort, is you're going to square. Okay, now, when you square something here, what you need to do is make sure there's one trig function by itself. Okay, I don't want to square it as it is now because it's going to get kind of messy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over the cosine x, and then I will square both sides. So go ahead and move over the cosine x. And when I do that, I get sine x to equal 1 plus cosine x. And now if you remember, I'm going to go ahead and square both sides. So let's go ahead and square and square. What do you get on the left side? Sine squared x. On the right side, remember when I square that quantity, that's like taking it times itself. So when I take that times itself, that means you need to do what? FOIL. So if I FOIL, first terms I get 1 plus 2 cosine x, because remember that's the O and the I, the outer and the inner will get you 2 cosine. And then what do the last terms get me? Cosine squared. And so now in looking at that problem, does anybody have any thoughts? Yep, change this to what? 1 minus cosine squared. The reason why I want to change this to 1 minus cosine squared is that everything else is already in terms of cosine. So that sine squared was kind of like the odd man out. And so now in looking at that, I need to simplify, so I need to get everything over to one side. First of all, the 1's cancel. What do you do now? Yep. Add your cosine squared x to both sides. So what are you left with on the left side? 0. On the right side, what do I have? 2 cosine x plus 2 cosine squared. Now it doesn't matter if you put the cosine squared first or if you put the cosine. So we have 2 terms. What do we do now? Factor out. Add 2 cosine. Nice job, you caught the 2. Okay, so when I factor out the 2 cosine, that leaves me with 1 plus cosine x. Zero product property states that, yep, 2 cosine x equals 0, or 1 plus cosine x equals 0. So using your sheet, where does cosine x, because obviously now if you divide by 2, you get cosine x to equal 0. So where does that occur? Where is it? pi over 2, and what else?
3 pi over
3 pi over 2. Now what I need to do is solve this one, and I end up getting cosine x to equal -1. Where does cosine equal -1? Pi. Now if you remember, one of the things with squaring both sides is that you need to check each solution because you might get an extraneous solution. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our original problem. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go back to this problem right here. And I'm going to plug in each of the 3 values and I'm going to see if it works or not. So first one, I'm going to plug pi over 2 in. But I know some of your calculators are probably in degree mode. So what is pi over 2 in degrees? You've got it on your chart.
45 degrees.
You've got it on your chart, 90. So I need to take sine of 90 minus cosine of 90. So go ahead and type that in on your calculator. Sine of 90 minus cosine of 90. What do you get? 1. That equals 1, so that is good. That is a solution. Now what I need to do is the same thing for 3 pi over 2. What is 3 pi over 2 as degrees? 270. So in place of 90, you're now going to put 270. What does that come out to be? What does it come out to be? Sine 270 minus cosine of 270?
Yeah.
-1. Okay, is that equal 1? No. So now we're going to try pi. What is pi? 180. So you're going to plug 180 in its place. So what does that come out to be? 1. So that is a solution. So you see by squaring both sides we actually did get an extraneous solution, and that was 3 pi over 2. So we only had 2 answers right here. So anytime you have to square, you must check your answers. Questions? We're going to add a few more problems to your assignment. So this is what you need to add from 1 through 18. Now remember, you already have 1 through 18 here. You need to add 22, 23, and 25 through 28. 22, 23, 25 through 28. Probably better be expecting a quiz soon.